meeting of the Mason Board of Education to order. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and supported. Any discussion from our interesting setup tonight? I don't see or hear any. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 2 on the agenda is public requests or comments. I have a couple of forms here. If anyone wanted to fill out a form and did not yet, feel free to come get one and I'll take it. We have 2 folks so far, like I said, and the first is Jim, and I have a microphone for you, Jim, but I don't know where you are.
Thank you. I'm Jim Voss. I have 2 son and daughter in Mason School District, one in middle school as well as the high school. What I want to really talk about is the USA Clay Target League and trying to establish something here if at all possible. This last weekend, my son and daughter were actually at state finals for the USA Clay Target League. And at that point, I just want to kind of introduce it to you guys, maybe possibly set up a potential meeting at that point for the school district, for the administrators, school board members, and community that want to actually hear about the interest and stuff that way. But it's truly about introducing students to another sport. Financially, there is no burden on the school district at that point. It really boils down to 2 things. It's really Title IX and the disciplinary and grades, as well as the name of the Mason School District at that point. So we would go out and get sponsorships as well as parents and stuff that way to fund the sport as well. So other than that, just my personal background and stuff that way. I have, as I said, 2 kids. I've been trap shooting for a while. Their first year was actually in USA Clay Target League. They actually currently shoot for Portland right now, and actually both of them did very well. He was first on the team, and he was 77th in the state. And he was actually, out of that 77 people in the league itself in Michigan, there's just under 2,100 kids. There's 116 schools, 2 of which, one of them is our arch rival of Okemos and Williamston, unfortunately. But other than that, they actually joined this spring for this as well. So I would like to answer any questions if anybody has any questions.
So during public comment, you get to speak for up to 3 minutes, but we don't interact.
Okay.
So we heard you, and we can have discussions and then make sure we know how to reach you, which is on this form. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then Maria, you're up next.
Hi, thank you so much. Maria Juris, I have 2 kids at Mason Public Schools, a soon-to-be junior and a soon-to-be 8th grader at the middle school. And I came along with Mr. Voss because my kids grew up, they were never wanted to be involved in any sports. And it turns out they like non-mainstream sports. They love swimming. They enjoy, my other son, they love water polo. He enjoys track, and it turns out they love trap shooting. Not a traditional sport, but they've taken to it. They asked, hey, could we get this started at Mason? We live in a rural, community. There's got to be a lot of other kids that would like to do something like this. And it turns out there are. I made a post because of the states at Michigan Trap Shooting Association this weekend. I made a post. I said, hey, look, it's about time that Mason gets a team also. And so there's an interest in other families that have kids that don't like those traditional sports. And then we've got this wonderful resource right here in our backyard, the Trap Shooting Association, which hosts the states and the nationals, in addition to like 12 other events over the course of the summer. they employ a lot of our younger community. A lot of 13-year-olds have their first jobs there. And so I wanted to take this opportunity, right on the heels of the states, to come in and introduce myself and personally invite you all. Next month are the state clay trap shooting events at the Trap Shoot. It's July 10th through the 14th. And so Saturday, July 13th, I'd love to have the school board and anybody else come out, and we would take you through and tell you all about it, and just to give you a firsthand look at what it's really all about. It's one of the safest sports out there. There are so many guidelines involved with making it a safe sport, and we think it would be wonderful if you could just experience that with us and take a look. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to number 3 on our agenda, which is old business. No old business. Number 4, approval of the consent agenda, please. Can I get a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda, including approval of minutes of the June 13, 2024 meeting, as presented.
Moved and supported. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We're on to number 5 on the agenda, committee and superintendent reports. And Kurt Creamer is going to talk about finance.
If you remember, we had our finance meeting before the last board meeting, so I already reported out, but the minutes are in our agenda tonight, so you can look through the actual minutes. We did have a small modification on the final 23-24 June budget, and which also affected, of course, the 24-25 starting point for the budget. So there were some final entries, but I'll let Tracy kind of go through that when you do the budget part. Okay? And so unless there's any questions on the minutes, I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Yeah, so there was one change from last week. The FTE was based on 3310. Had to do with, try it again? Okay. We increased the 31 AA restricted expenditure grants. We increased our legal fees. We increased the budget for Chromebooks that were purchased. We adjusted our 22L transportation restricted expenditures. We put that money in the revenue in the revision 2, but the state reduced it back down due to the amount of funding that was spread across the entire state. The one minor change had to do with increased budget for terminal pay that needed to be put in the budget. And we moved $200,000 of our expenditures for the Harvey HVAC. That work is not going to get completed till July, so we took a portion of that budget and moved it from 23-24 into 24-25. So we're projected to end the year at about 67,000 in the red, with a fund balance about 18.91%. Food service, we adjusted a lot for their free meals, increased a la carte, and adjusted our federal reimbursement rate, and we adjusted for our staff and food and supply costs. So she's a little over budget on that budget of 25,000 in the red. And our student activity, we just adjust those for our year-to-date activity. The biggest change this year is we had a lot of trips going on this year. We had the Costa Rica trip and an art trip, so we had a lot more revenues in our student activity accounts.
Are there questions for Tracy on the last revision? Pretty much the last revision of the year? There you go.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve the amended 2023-24 budget as presented.
Support.
Moved and supported. Is there a discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Can I get a roll call vote?
Dr. Lark? Yes. Mr. Kelly? Yes. Mr. Creamer?
Yes.
Ms. Evans? Yes. Myself, yes. Mr. Mumby?
Yes?
Mr. Jerosha? Yes. 7-0.
Okay, now we're going to talk 24-25 budget. Is that correct?
Make a motion to open.
Okay. So we'll start with a motion to, I don't know that I make a motion.
We just opened it.
We are now entering our budget hearing portion of the night, and it is 7:11 Slurpee time, and our budget hearing is open, and Tracy is going to walk us through the proposed 2024-25 budget.
So the 24-25 budget, the biggest change, our enrollment is down by 5 FTEs. That's adjusting for our graduating seniors and our estimating our incoming kindergartners. The one change that I did do differently is our 23A students. I always took those back to the lower number, but they've been steady the last 3 years since I've been here, so I'm going to leave that FTE in this budget. The foundation was increased by 241 per pupil, makes our foundation 9849. The biggest thing is our COVID funding has really come to an end, so you'll see a lot of reductions in this budget. 310 was reduced by 178,000, critical mapping 27, 27L was reduced by 170, 99U 68,000, 51C carryover funding of 140, and our GSRP startup grants of 50,000 was decreased. So we knew that coming out of COVID, we had a lot of money that we would have to come back to general fund or find different funding sources for. On the positive side, we increased 31A by 287,000 and 51E by 40,000. Most of the other grants, the other two big grant adjustments were ESSER 3. That grant ends 6/30/90. 6/30 of 24, 11T goes to 9/30 of 24, and that's $664,000 reduction. So between those two, you're looking at almost $1 million in reduction of grant funding. And our special ed claim dollars are down 182,000. On the expenditure side, we granted steps to teachers, but no other pay increases were budgeted due to negotiations. We blended the 2024-25 PA 152 hard cap for health insurance. We eliminated all our grant fund expenditures, and we eliminated executive position and reassigned that person to the Steele principal position. And then you'll see the $200,000 increase from the Harvey HVAC that I moved from 23-24 into 24-25. So this budget shows a 1.3 million in the red, with a 16.17% fund balance. Now, one thing that's still not decided yet is the OPEB funding. That could be a big swing one way or the other, depending on what the legislature does with the OPEB. So we kind of took the line that a lot of other districts did and left our retirement percentages all the same. On the food service side, we rolled everything over, but again, the COVID funding for supply chain grant, that was $124,000, had to come out of the budget. And then we reduced budgets for staff because she had some staff that were on paid medical leave, and we had to pay full-time for sub positions. So once we netted all those adjustments out, including removing some equipment like the kettle purchase that we did in 23-24, taking that money out, she's in the red by 49,000. But again, we're just estimating, we assume that our account will go up because the free meals should continue. So her projected ending fund balance be about 24.14%. And special revenue, we just usually roll those over because we never know where they're going to be. So we decreased our revenue by 54 and increased our expenditures by 45.
Questions on the proposed budget?
I have a general question. This budget shows a reduction in our overall revenues for the first time. After. Thank you. For the sake of understanding where we're at budget-wise and what we can expect moving forward, you mentioned some federal dollars being eliminated, which is expected. You know, they're supposed to be spent over time. But over the last 4 or 5 years, actually 5 years, I believe, our general budget revenues have increased by 40%, which is incredible. And I guess if you could just provide a little explanation of that and why that number is going to presumably continue to decrease over time.
So yes, our revenues, the COVID money, there was a big influx of COVID money. So a lot of what a lot of school districts did around us was, you know, try to backfill as much as we can, but we've hired significant number of nurses, social workers, psychologists. Those are all 31AA grants, so that grant will continue on for hopefully a couple more years. But we're just looking at different ways to fund on trying to right-size our district, because, you know, we did add some positions, so knowing going forward, we'll probably have to reevaluate some positions, which is what we did with, unfortunately, I must say, you know, the eliminating the DOS position. That was step one. Do you want to add anything?
So we've been preparing for this change in the budget for the better part of the last year. This is very much expected. And we know that we've added a lot of positions over the past several years utilizing federal dollars, and that once those federal dollars are no longer available, we're going to have to make some challenging decisions. So we began that process with our Director of Student Supports position this spring. We had an opportunity to place Mr. Kiefner into a role that he's very highly qualified for, the Steele principal position, a win for the district, and made our first difficult decision to eliminate a position that's brought great value to the district. So now we will be planning in central office to maintain all the work that we've been doing and expand upon it with one fewer person. We'll be doing similar things with other positions. We will make difficult decisions over the next year as to what we keep and what we can no longer support. So the change in revenue was very much anticipated, and we began planning for it months ago, and we'll continue that work through the school year.
I think I would have liked to add too that you'll notice that we did add money. We did increase our fund balance over the last 2 years, knowing that we would need that money this next year to carry on some of the programs that were put into place.
One quick follow-up. Over that period of time, since I've been on the board, our budget has gone up 13 million a year for the reasons you explained. And our overall spending, if you include capital spending, it's gone from 35 to 60 million overall. I guess. I guess, is there a limitation, or what considerations were made, you know, core instructional salaries, elementary, middle school, high school, have gone up only 10% over that same period of time. Is there, what's the thought process in that? Are there limiting factors, for example, classroom spaces, things to that effect, or funding limitations on the actual spending that would prevent us from hiring additional instructional staff?
So I want to make sure I understand the question first. It feels to me as if the question is why the additional spending has not been on core instruction. Is that the essence of the question? Right. So much of the federal grant dollars that flowed into the district and all districts, not just in the state but across the country, were designed to support mental health needs. So correspondingly, many of our additional staff people fit into that category. That's what the grant dollars were earmarked for, and that's how we chose to allocate them. Certainly, we've allocated resources to learning loss as well. And we have programming that supports that with Bulldog Brilliance and I apologize, I'm drawing a blank on the other program.
Level Up.
Level Up, sorry. So I think that's the short answer to your question, but if you have a follow-up, I'll do my best.
And there are grants that are restricted. They all, not all the grants could be used for salaries. Some had to be used for improvements.
Yeah. So one of our, when I say our, I really mean administrators everywhere. One of our concerns that we have with funding is the restrictions that grant dollars place on us. And sometimes we have real difficult limitations on how we spend dollars. And we make decisions accordingly. We certainly would much prefer much of that money to come into our general fund so that it was less restricted, but that's typically not the case.
Is there further discussion on the proposed budget? Okay, I'll get this wrong, but I think we close the budget hearing at 7:22. Then we're back to our regular meeting and we have a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the adoption of the 24-25 budget as presented.
Moved and supported. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Evans? Yes. Mr. Kelly? Yes. Mr. Mumby?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Dr. Lark?
Yes.
Mr. Drosha? Yes. Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
7-0.
Okay, we have a budget, which is a good thing. We're going to keep moving on. Sorry, it's hard to balance all this. Special reports of recognition. We have a report, do we not? May I hand you this microphone?
So we do have a pretty substantial presentation this evening. However, before I introduce it, I really do want to take the opportunity to thank Mrs. Wooden and her staff for the really diligent work over a long period of time to put this budget together. And her office does great work all the time, but the months of May and the first part of June are particularly challenging. So thank you for all the additional time, effort, and hours to put our budget together. So okay, our presentation this evening is our first look at a potential 2025 bond. In the back of the room, right next to Mr. Berryhill, is a foam board with our strategic plan that was passed by our Board of Education in the summer of 2023. And it's divided into 4 focus areas. The 4th focus area specifically deals with facilities and infrastructure. And the first objective within that focus area calls for us to prepare for a potential 2025 bond. So the plan was passed in the summer of 23. Beginning in the fall of 23, our bond team, who are seated over here and will all introduce themselves in just a minute or two as soon as I give up the mic, worked to begin a facilities assessment of our current facilities. And you're going to see some information about that tonight. I don't think this will surprise anyone in the room, but our elementary facilities are in excellent condition. The 2017 bond, which we are just bringing to a close this summer with work in this building as well as the high school, primarily focused on those elementary buildings. So they are in excellent shape. However, the facility assessment also identified great need in our secondary buildings. So we're going to be talking at length about how we might go about some form of an initiative that would allow us to begin addressing those needs. In the winter, early months of 2024, we began preparing, contracted with an owner's rep, Plant Moran Real Point, to help us with the pre-bond planning portion of the work. And we've been working since then to be prepared to begin presenting to the board and community the opportunity in front of us and our needs. So that's just a bit of context for our presentation this evening. With that, I'm going to introduce Kevin Donnelly from Plant Moran Real Point, who is our primary owner's rep for pre-bond services, and he's going to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kinzer. Kevin Donnelly with Plant Moran Real Point. Happy to be here tonight. Very excited to be part of the bond team, working with administration and our existing partners, GMB and the Chrisman Company. Hopefully tonight will be informative. It's just an update on where we're at. Like Dr. Kinzer had indicated, we've been working alongside the team now for the last 3.5, 4 months. And this certainly won't be the first time we get in front of the board, but we thought it would be a good point in time to take a time out, give the board an update on where we're at, and start reporting out on progress. So for tonight's agenda, I'll allow our team to introduce ourselves, starting with myself. Again, Kevin Donnelly with Plant Moran Real Point. I'm a senior vice president with the firm, been with the firm for 10 years, been either in the construction industry or owner's rep role for 28 years. Started my career just west of here with Granger Construction many years ago, so very familiar with the area. I'm going to turn it over to our team to do some introductions. Then we'd like to give just a bond planning, a high-level update on where we're at. We have a gentleman here, which you'll meet here in a moment, Paul Wills with Plant Moran Real Point, and Jesse Nelson with Baker Tilly, that will give a presentation related to bond financing, and then wrap it up with any questions and answers. Certainly, as we're moving along, if there's any questions, feel free to ask them, and we'd be happy to answer those questions along the way. As far as introductions, again, Kevin Donnelly, Plant Moran Real Point. I'll turn it over to my partner there, Paul Wills.
Thanks, Kevin. Again, my name's Paul Wills. I'm a partner in charge of the K-12 practice within Plant Moran Real Point. I've been with the firm for 24 years. I worked on over $6 billion of programs with very, very large districts such as Detroit Public Schools, Ann Arbor Schools, Grand Rapids, Flint, et cetera. Also very small schools such as Homer, Cassopolis, Niles, Vandalia, et cetera. So we're pleased to be here tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rob Crow.
Thank you, Paul. As Paul indicated, my name is Rob Crow. It's great to be here tonight with you all. I'm from the Chrisman Company. I'm a vice president. I've been with the firm about 13 years now, and a majority of that time has been spent in the K-12 arena. I really enjoy it. We've been working, doing great things with the Mason School District now for a few years as part of that previous bond that's winding down this summer. So excited to be on for the next look and to do some analysis to help inform the decision-making process here soon. And I'll pass it on to the next.
Hi, I'm Andy McLeod. I'm with GMB, K-12 client lead, and I've been with the company for about 20 years. So it's super exciting what we've done to date and getting a feel for the next phase of next bond. So we're super excited. So thanks for having us.
Great. My name is Jesse Nelson. I'm a certified public accountant with Baker Tilly. We work with school districts and local governments on financing capital improvements, property tax calculations, water and sewer rate studies. We've worked with school districts and Mason, the last bond, and putting the property tax, the finance side together. I've been with the firm about 20 years and really appreciate your time and excited to be here tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen. And there's also a face on there, upper left-hand corner, Greg Van Kirk, who's a managing partner with Plant Moran Real Point. Wasn't able to be here tonight, but he's actively working alongside Paul and I and the team on the program. So getting into the bond planning update, like to start by giving everybody just an overview of the current scope that we're working on. Pre-bond planning timelines, where we're at today, what the next steps look like leading towards the end of the year. Turn it over to my partner, Paul Wills. He'll go through demographics, pupil enrollment update. Then we'll get into the utilization piece of the current buildings. And then just some of the considerations that we're thinking through right now early in the stages at a high level for the middle school and the high school. Obviously, you guys have done a lot of good work with the elementaries. So understanding that the larger needs right now are going to be at this building and the high school, we wanted to give you something to think about with those two buildings. In the blue box here is really just some of the pre-bond activities that we're engaged to perform and that we're working on. Everything to the right is really things that happened post-election, assuming the bond will pass. We are doing strategic planning right now with the team, feasibility studies, a little bit of real estate analysis as it relates to the middle school. You'll hear a little bit tonight about demographics and pupil enrollment, site programming and budgeting, facility condition assessment, which we've walked all the buildings, and we're in the process of finalizing a detailed facility assessment for each building. You'll hear from Jesse tonight, getting into the finance presentation, some of the financial modeling and the strategies moving forward with the next bond. And then leading into the fall, it's really when we're going to start engaging the community as it relates to stakeholder input, and then obviously a campaign leading up to the next bond. Sorry, that should have been indented a little bit more, but we kicked things off February 14th with the team, the administration team. Third week of February, we kicked things off in earnest, jumped right into our scope of services with enrollment projections, utilization studies, which you'll hear about tonight, and then walking all the buildings, working with administration and facilities to develop a current facility assessment capital plan, which we will have wrapped up this month. Here we are tonight, June 18th, for our first update to the board. Leading after tonight's meeting, we're going to continue the process as we get some of these deliverables complete, having calibration meetings with the various stakeholders, doing review and revisions accordingly. And then really when school gets back in this fall, September is when we're going to really start working with the community, setting up stakeholder meetings, and working that process and facilitating that process probably through September through November. And that will include a survey that the team is working on, just what is the community thinking and what's the thought on how the community thinks with the next bond program and what would be important. Do the takeaways from those steps, do review and revisions, and then get back in front of the board here towards the end of the year and report back out as we have things a little more refined. I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Paul Wills here, and he's going to cover pupil enrollment and demographics.
Thanks, Kevin, if you want. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Good. So again, one of the privileges we have working with school districts is, so Plant Moran, Real Point, we are certified by the Department of Treasury to provide enrollment projections for districts. We have over 110 clients that we provide enrollment projections for. So a lot of this information that you're going to see tonight is really, okay, Plant Moran, Real Point, how do you do those enrollment projections? What does it mean from a financial projections system? What does it mean from an educational leadership standpoint at each individual school? So this is our process. So again, we take a look at your geographical informational systems. We'll talk a little bit about how we get that information and what it relates to as it relates to Mason Public Schools. We look at your historical data. So again, every fall, you have your fall count and you have your spring count. And that's ultimately how you get your foundational allowances from the state of Michigan. And then we're going to look at live births. What's happening in Ingham County, what's happening in the state as a whole, where those opportunities and challenges may be as you look for the next 5 years of enrollment going forward. Ultimately, we come with a pupil injection report. I was told I had to need to be brief and be interested. I think we have 86 pages of enrollment information if you're really interested, but again, we're going to keep this high level and brief at this time. So the red polygon that you see is the district, Mason Public Schools school boundary district. So the information we're going to look at is everything that's happening within that particular boundary going forward. Some of the information we look at. So right now, population is just under 20,000. That includes 5,400 families. It also looks at the median size of 2.46 housing size for the median household size going forward. The thing we also look at is 0 to 5. So you may have to say, hey, what about 3 to 4-year-old programs, pre-K for all? How does that relate to our current programs? What does that trend model look like? And you can see 234 5-year-olds, 197. You can kind of see the impact of COVID. I think you heard an update. You lost a little bit of outgoing senior, incoming freshmen. What does that trend look like going forward? We take a look at kind of the major buckets of students, and obviously public versus private. So again, who's paying a tuition-based versus choosing public education. The one thing we really want to take a look at is housing. So Mason Public Schools still has a very strong housing stock. You're 96% occupied. Also, more importantly, your housing values are actually being maintained, and actually, if you got your most recent tax bill, you probably saw your taxable values going up. Mr. Nelson is going to talk a little bit about how that can benefit the district from a financial projection standpoint. So again, this is just some of the demographics that are coming out of the report as we go forward. So next we start looking at going back to 2020, looking at 2023, projecting out to 2028. So again, the overall population within that boundary is going to relatively remain the same. Some of the things you're going to start looking at is, again, some potential declines, predominantly at the 0 to 5 and ultimately elementary school. The good news is you do have a lot of options in terms of people moving into the district at the upper elementary, middle school stock going forward. And we'll have a chart here that kind of shows that going forward. This is just kind of that same information from 2020. So I'm going to pick on 4-year-olds. So back in 2020, coming out of COVID, there's just over 275. That dropped to about 197, and we are starting to see this level off. By the way, this is not just a Mason Schools. This is really across the state. We're actually at MSBO in April. We actually did a statewide population demographic report. We broke it down by the 7 major counties. Ingham was included in that going forward. So this is kind of the bottom of the live births, and again, it's starting to slowly uptick going forward. Take a look at the same information. This is actually Ingham County. So the big blue columns you see are the actual number of live births in Ingham County. Again, this information is audited by the Department of Community Health, and this is how health systems ultimately get their reimbursements. The good news is, back in 2012, this is Mason Schools' capture rate of incoming kindergarten students from that perspective. So back in 2012, it was 6.8%. 2013, you jumped to 8.1%. You basically maintained 8.1% through COVID, through other financial challenges. So the good news is you consistently pick up 8.1%. The bad news is if you look at these numbers right here, this is your current middle school, elementary school. This is your new 0 to 5-year-olds coming into the school system. So again, that 8%, what does that mean from a projection standpoint from a school district enrollment perspective? So we're going to transition a little bit into the actual projections. This is an eye chart. I do not expect you to read it. But the way it does work is this is the school year. So in kindergarten, you had 222.91 students. Remember, this is FTE, as Ms. Wooden pronounces, this is out your foundation allowances. What ends up happening is if you go over and down, you see 222.16. You basically maintain almost 100% of those students going forward. So again, if you take a look at this thick black line here, everything to the left of this is historical data. So again, this is something that's projected to the state and ultimately how you get your foundation. So again, 2017, K-12, you had 3,060. Special education, your total FT enrollment was just 3,151. And you can see you started to grow. Impact of COVID, you dropped, but guess what? You bounced right back. So again, that just shows the strong programming. People are invested in Mason Schools. The challenge you're going to have, though, is when you go from 3,300 births to 2,700 births at 8%, you're going to start seeing these kindergarten classes slowly decline from 270, 258, 237, 220, 222. So again, that's kind of the projections that we look forward. Now we also take a look at number of houses, number of housing stock. What's the value of those homes? Ultimately, what's the first-time buyer age? Who's choosing private versus public? So we actually take this enrollment information, we actually do an algorithm, and it provides this going forward. So the good news is your K-5, again, about 1,500 at the height. You'll be about 15 down to 1,350 in the next 5 years. And you'll hear from Andy and from Kevin on utilization. What does that mean? So the good news is we're not here to look at potential repurposing a building. We're not looking at adding a brand new elementary school. You just spent a lot of money investing in those schools. So the good news is your elementary level is actually where it really should be in terms of utilization, very strong. Middle school, so again, about 750, you see it start increasing. Again, people are choosing Mason schools as that secondary home. So you're gonna see that upper elementary, middle school population actually help offset some of that declining birth. And at the high school level, about 950, 960. So again, very level enrollment, which we love to see. We've had some districts where they lost 3,000 students, 8,000 students. Those are very hard conversations to have. We're just very pleased to show very steady enrollment going forward. So the good news is these are just kind of taking the eye charts, making it more visible. So again, K-5, you can see the impact of COVID, bounce right back up. And then again, as that live birth continues to decline, again, you're going to start to see some of that decline. Now, again, we're taking into consideration the current pre-K4 programs. What happens if it's pre-K for 4-year-olds? And then you have that cohort of, let's say, 80%, 90%, et cetera. So those are something we can modify as we go through the enrollments in the future. Middle school, again, 6.8, about 815, 824 in the next 5 years. And then high school, basically 9,700. So very strong enrollment going forward. So the key takeaways, again, Mason, the community as a whole, about 19,900 students. Very high occupancy rates, which we love to see. Strong housing values, but again, that declining birth rate, you can just see the numbers of 3,300 just 10 years ago down to 2,700. We do see that leveling off right around that 2,700, not dropping, but also not going back up to where we were, let's say, in 2010, 2011, 2012. Again, capture rate, 8.1%. I think what you're doing from a programmatic standpoint is maintaining to pull those students in. But again, you kind of see the elementary, about 1,500 students down to 1,350 over a 5-year period. So it's not something that's, so drastic that you have to but just keep an eye on it. And then ultimately at the high school, middle school level, about 1,700 to 1,800 in the next 5 years. And you're gonna say, well, why is that important, Mr. Wills? And I know Mr. McLeod, Mr. Crow will kind of get in that in terms of facility planning for potentials going forward. Any questions on the enrollment and demographics? Yes, sir.
Mason, I guess, relative to other communities, historically has been able to maintain much better next forward. In fact, the last time we went through this, Mason had pretty strong, relative to other communities. You probably have project, I suspect, even stronger than it is now relative to other neighbors. And at that point, the greater, just in the Lansing area alone, we have lost in terms of the total K-12 population, we have lost the equivalent of essentially nearly two Mason-sized school districts that just disappeared.
Correct. Correct.
And it looks like, Mason continues to be pretty steady in that regard. But two questions related to that. Number one is, how do you factor in non-resident enrollment? Because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that you still essentially, through school of choice and non-resident enrollment, maintain essentially one section of kindergartners every year, just from that, to sustain. That's still the case, right? That's right. Okay. So how is non-resident enrollment factored in here, or is it?
That's a great question. So this is district-wide, so this does include the school of choice. We also ran a secondary analysis just with resident only. So I think if you're interested to see the full report, by all means, I think Dr. Kinzer and Ms. Wooden could send that out. And again, if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to reach out. So we actually ran it 2 different ways. One was FTE, everybody, including schools of choice, inbound and outbound, as well as just resident only who live within that geographical boundary. So.
Can I just add one piece of context for that, though? Keep in mind that many of those kindergarten choice kids are siblings of families that are already in the district.
And we've had success in attracting non-resident students. It's just a matter of capacity, and that, I suspect, definitely hasn't changed. What would the impact be if it's significant?
Actually, that's one of the things that we actually find is when districts actually invest, if it's a zero mill proposal, which I think Mr. Nelson kind of walked through, here's what a zero mill, slight mill increase, et cetera, and give you again, this is just totally information. We're not looking for any insight today, but what we have found is when a district invests monies, that occupancy actually stays the same, but what ends up happening is this housing value actually increases. So people want to be in the schools that are being taken care of, if you will.
I was asking it specifically from the point of view of families with children, obviously.
Yeah.
Is it the same?
It is the same. I mean, if you take a look, don't quote me on things like about 73% don't have children in the district. The rest would be grandparents, parents, kids are older, they love living in Mason, they don't move, those things going forward. But we have not seen any significant increase or decrease. I have seen one instance back in 2010 when the board made a decision to move 8th graders up to the high school as part of the bond, which we didn't recommend. They said, hey, we have the, we don't want to, we're going to shut down a middle school. They went there, and unfortunately the bond did not pass. And there was a whole, you can imagine, a whole cadre of information. And then about 5 years later, guess what? New board, new leadership. And so again, I guess the message here is you have very strong enrollment. We don't see any major increases or decreases that would significantly impact any future capital planning from a needing an additional building or having to just close down a facility. Very strong housing stock going forward. And at the end of the day, I think, like you said, you're seeing this continuous capture rate. So again, even though the birth rate's down, your enrollment, you're actually offsetting by people moving into the district. So I think it's actually a good thing to invest in neighborhoods and schools and things of that nature to help maintain that strong housing stock. So.
That capture rate that's non-resident and resident. There's no distinction there.
For this analysis, but we did do it by resident only too. So again, like I said, I was told to be brief. So I mean, we had a 2-hour presentation at MSBO. I know Tracy's like, you don't get 2 hours. So.
One other quick question. We had projections done, I think, 5 years ago, maybe 6.
Stanford, Middle Cities.
Do you sometimes, I mean, how does this projection match up with that? I mean, how accurate are these projections?
Yeah, so we actually overlooked the last 20 years. We're about 99.4% accurate. So if we've gone back to districts that we started working with, like Ann Arbor schools, we told them 5 years ago you're going to be at 18,000 students, like Borbori Ann Arbor. And guess what? They have 18,000 students. They have a $24 million budget issue. I mean, so it's like, sometimes we have to deliver very hard news. Some districts are consolidating. They shut down a high school. So when we had this opportunity, I'm like, thank you. Consistent enrollment, very strong programming. So again, these are some that we enjoy. And again, we often recommend districts do it every 3 to 5 years. Some do it literally every single year, and I don't think it's a huge variation. If you have, let's say, a charter school move into the neighborhood, into the district, we'd say you want to do it every year for the first 3 to 5 years, just to see what that impact may be. Again, if a neighboring school was closed, or closed districts say, hey, I'm doing schools of choice, what's that impact? So again, those are some of those one-offs that we look at. But I think for Mason Public Schools, I think a 3 to 5 year window would be appropriate.
And I expect other aspects such as the availability of more or less online options. I mean, Mason has expanded its online. I think we allow up to 2, maybe 3 online courses per semester. That's very popular. And certainly those types of changes can students as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
Real quick, I'll be really brief here. This assumes no major subdivisions, apartment complex, anything else coming into Mason, which have been at least anecdotally talked about. So if any of that happens, of course, that changes, and you'll talk about our strain capacity at the elementary schools, even if we stay flat. If a subdivision moves in, we don't have room for those kids.
Yeah, so we did the demographic. We did reach out to municipalities and townships, like what is your approved housing stock? And that's why I think you kind of look at it every 3 to 5 years. But if you have a major subdivision development, so the question is, interest rates are still relatively high. You have, pretty strong housing values of potentially new housing stock. When you really look at it, it's 0.46 student per housing unit. So someone says, now we're down 50 kids. How many houses? You have to build 100 houses, by the way, every year for the next 12 years just to stay flat. So we did incorporate some of the new housing that's been approved, but not endally talked about. We do work with Dexter, Chelsea, some of those along the 94 corridor where people move to the third ring of urban Ann Arbor, if you will. Dexter, I think, built 800 homes. I think they saw 125 kids. A lot of the housing stock is kind of geared for the condo-esque 55 and older, not necessarily children. But we've actually done some of those deeper dives if need be. So again, we have incorporated the housing that's been approved to date. So, thanks. All right, Mr. Donnelly.
Take that clicker, thank you. So I had mentioned previously, we have gotten into all the buildings. We did meet with administrators to understand how your buildings are currently being utilized. So a lot of the data that we're going to be going through here in the next few moments will support those conversations. First chart here is really just kind of a high-level summary of all of your elementary buildings, including the James Harvey. It goes through the total classrooms, any special ed classrooms, any vacant classrooms. And this just gives you kind of the graph of how all of those different numbers shake out per building. Some of the analytics towards the right-hand side, you know, pupil enrollment, and then kind of a square footage per student. You can see a lot of these, at least at the elementary level, are relatively consistent. Obviously, the Harvey building being a pre-K, a little bit different usage for that building, but your buildings are falling in the 140s to 150 per student. Same thing with the high school and the middle school. These are basically, again, you can see from this column right here, we don't have a lot of extra space. There's really no spaces within the buildings that are being underutilized or vacant classrooms sitting around. So I think that tells a pretty good story as well. Just some more information. Some of the information from the previous page. It shows your current enrollment, and again, this is part of a more robust document that we're presenting to the district, but shows your enrollment for each building. Same information from before, square footage per student, and really the key takeaway I think from this slide is your utilization, which is over to the far right here. This gives the various numbers for each building, and in aggregate, in average, your elementaries are at 98%. So you're properly utilizing your elementary buildings, and based on some of the information that Mr. Wills had provided, that your enrollment is going to remain pretty steady but decline a bit over the next 5 years. If there is a couple developments that come in or some major changes that skew those numbers, we have looked at the opportunity to provide expansion to your current elementaries, and we feel that most of the buildings, if you were in that situation, have the ability to expand through additions to make up for that additional student body. But your classrooms are well utilized at the elementaries. The middle school is currently at 69%, and the high school is at 78%.
If I could real quick, Kevin, go back one slide real quick. One of the things you're going to see in the subsequent floor plans, we're not going to go floor plan by floor plan, but to give you an idea, they're going to have the green, which is general education. This would be your art, music, STEM, computers, things of that nature, special education, reading resource rooms, et cetera, preschool, and then obviously the vacancies. And then if you go to the next slide, you have gone through the PQ application. So in 2004, you had $11.4 million bond that was primarily for the high school athletics, pool, et cetera. Then obviously you had the most recent bond. The state wants you about 85%. So as a district, you're like right where you should be. It's okay actually to have 101, 103%, et cetera, because at the end of the day, we're not maximizing, we're optimizing, so we're looked at more from an academic lens, if that makes sense. So I know parents don't like to hear this, but by fire code, you'd actually stick 45 kids in an elementary school building. In a classroom, you'd never do that. By the way, we would not do that. By the way, we've had some districts at a deficit elimination from the state, and guess what? They had 35 kids at the elementary, but they had no other physical choice. So at the end of the day, I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, we're 103%, we have to put these additions on. It's just one of those, we looked at it from an academic lens, not from a teacher's contractual or even from fire code. So I think that's just helpful to see when you say, oh my gosh, 103%, Mr. Wills, Mr. Donnelly, team, like, should we put an addition on? We're like, not yet. So. Yeah, so right now, We had 20 at junior K, 22 at K, 24 at first and second, and then 27, 32. So again, some districts say, hey, run it at 35, and where are we at? It's like, oh my gosh, you shut down 2 schools, like, we're not here. So again, more of that academic lens, Andy, which is a great point, so. Floor plans.
All right, thank you. I'm going to flip through these relatively quick, but this will be part of the deliverable in the final utilization package that we provide, but just floor plans that show how each building's being utilized. The elementaries.
And again, special thanks to the principals, our partners at GMB and at Crispin Company as well, to really walk through and say how we're utilizing these for general purpose, for special ed and resource rooms, et cetera.
Middle school, and then obviously the high school. Some of the key takeaways, district-wide, there's 150 general ed classrooms. We have a total of 30 column specialty classrooms, whether it's art, music, etc. 28 special ed classrooms. You have a total of 617,000 square feet across the district on a total of 117 acres, and that's obviously comprised of your 4 elementaries, your middle, and your high school. Based on those 150 classrooms, the capacity is noted below. The elementary, we're assuming 25 students for 74 classrooms. Elementary-wide, you have capacity for 850 students. 36 total classrooms at 30 for the middle school, 1080 as far as capacity. And at the high school, 42 at a number of 30, 1,260 students for capacity over there. We've already covered some of these numbers here, but it's just a summary of your utilization, 98 elementary, 69 and 78 for the middle and high. And as Paul had indicated, per the Treasury, you want to be right around 85%, and you guys are right there.
Questions on capacity enrollments? I know sometimes like we're full, and yes, at the elementary you are, and I think you see some opportunities. Some people ask, like, well, how do you increase, let's say, a lower utilization? We somewhere, let's say, you take out every 3rd classroom, you create like a collaboration space or a STEM space. So the actual classroom count goes down, and I'm going to let maybe Andrew kind of talk about that as we start talking about middle school options, what that could look like, and then ultimately, it helps increase that utilization, even though the square footage of the building still remains the same. So.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our partners, Rob Crow and Andy with GMB, to talk a little bit about some of the capital improvement considerations. And for tonight's conversation, we really wanted to take a look at the middle school and the high school, knowing that the elementaries have had a lot of good work done to them. So just some things to think about from this conversation related to those 2 buildings.
Thank you very much. So we've heard a lot of great information sort of setting the stage on kind of what's happening in the community around us. These next few slides, we're going to talk a few data points on kind of what that looks like as we start the analysis of opportunity. And I just want to remind folks, this is an iterative process. There aren't any recommendations in this slide deck yet. This is just informational, and just kind of how the process is working. And with all this information that we're hearing, we're going to start making some recommendations and things down the line to help inform this decision-making process. So some of those pieces of information, we wanted to give a little context of what is the cost of improvements in today's market, and compare it back a little bit as well to what you've experienced in the recent bond processes. So this first kind of block of information towards the top is talking about renovation of existing facilities. So not increasing the size of facilities, but just renovating what is there. And that doesn't get into necessarily improving or changing what's going on inside the building, just getting it back to warm, safe, dry, if there was a portion of the building that needed some maintenance attention or improvement in that sense. So this is showing you a sense of kind of like the low range, the high range, and these are construction values, dollars per square foot. So just an informational point of context here. And then comparing it down, the next bullet here, just talking a little bit about the amount of area you have across all the buildings, what investment you saw in a previous bond, and what that worked out to. Of course, we know every single square foot wasn't improved upon, so we weren't spending $200 per square foot, but it averaged out to about $112 per square foot across the entire district, but really focused, as we've talked a few times tonight, focusing on the elementary schools, and then some more modest improvements to the middle and high school. And that just kind of talks about that at the bottom bullet.
Good question for you.
Certainly.
These numbers are really maintenance, as much as anything. I mean, so for this $150 to $200 cycle, I mean, what's the cycle time on that type of maintenance cost? Is it every 5 years, every 10, every 20?
It's a great question. It varies. You could be in that 10 to 20 range.
I would say 10 to 20 based on those numbers.
And great question, but it kind of hints too at there is a lot of variables that goes into all this. So these are generalizations just for context, but as we go further down this process, we get more specific, we get more detailed, and the analysis gets a little more.
And again, this is, in this room per se, it would be new finishes, new lighting, new, some new HVAC.
New sound system.
New sound system maybe. But not changing a whole lot of how this classroom functions or how this lecture room functions. So that's kind of what those numbers represent.
So just for context. Just a little graphic on the middle school.
Yeah, so this is looking at this site here. We're on about 23 acres. There's 130,000 square feet roughly in this building. So just kind of looking from above, looking at what our opportunities are. We're not going to suggest anything that happens tonight, but we are looking behind the scenes at, okay, if we were to do something in this site, taking the numbers from Plant Moran Real Point and analyzing utilization to get to a projection of what we think that building should be built to as far as students go. And then I think you saw earlier that middle school is at about 175 square feet per person, per student. And that's a pretty good range that you're real close to that number. And if we were building brand new, it would probably be in the 180, 185. So you're right on target. Then it's just dealing with, okay, what do you have? What's the next level is what do we want to do with it? You have the options are endless. If Jesse could bring all kinds of money, but we'll take a look at what that, what the utilization study looks like, what we're seeing across the state and across the country, and applying that with a filter of what kind of dollars might we have. So we'll do that for both the middle school.
Yeah, we'll get to the high school in a second.
Oh, yep. Sorry.
There's one more slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just about the middle
Skipped
school.
right over it.
And this is, again, to inform, like Andy's talking about, there's a lot of options. We'll explore many of them. And again, not recommendations at all, but just to kind of give a sense of context, what it would take at that higher end dollar per square foot, and these are just construction costs, just to renovate the building as is. You're in the neighborhood of $26 million. Renovations with additions. Let's say we identify that there is a need to add square footage to the building. Then you're looking at more of a $300 per square foot cost. So that gets you closer to the $40 million. An entire new building, not renovating an existing structure, that's more in the $450 per square foot range. So that's talking $60 million. Again, I'm going to say it a lot of times because I don't want people to misunderstand it. These aren't recommendations yet, but it gives us some framework to understand, and it'll make what Jesse's going to talk about here in a few minutes make more sense on what type of dollar value of proceeds we may need to consider to accomplish the needs, wants, and desires of the district. So that's a little bit for the middle school. We'll switch to the high school for a bit.
So high school, we'll do the same thing. We're going to take the utilization numbers, kind of run it through our projections and see where we're at. The square footage per pupil per student at the high school is even higher, which is also great. It's also pretty much right on target. So, when we were to do work there, we would look at very similar things. Would you renovate the whole thing? Would you renovate a portion? Would you mow it down and do new? Would you, all those options are on the table, and we'll all make that decision together, and it won't be just based on, I think we should really do this. It will be very factual, and, They wouldn't let me even if I wanted to, but.
It'll be a very collaborative process. So just some numbers onto that high school, the building there instead. So we've got a couple stats up top, but then down below, we're really talking just in that renovation realm. Do you renovate kind of on the low end at $150 a square foot, 33 million on up to you could be 44 million or north, depending on the intensity or objectives you want to achieve if that structure was left as is square footage wise and you didn't add on to it. But as you can tell, there are many iterations we could go through, many different opportunities we will go through to investigate it and provide the information to the appropriate decision makers to help understand what the path forward is. I think next we're going to transition. Certainly.
I'm just wondering, for low, mid, and high renovation, does that, the previous slide for the middle school, there was only like $20 million difference in brand new school, right?
Sure.
So it's
Yep.
kind of like you're really investing that extra $20 million to offset the future maintenance cost of an old school.
Yeah.
So does that work out over time? Probably. So then I look at this slide. So then we've got low, mid, high range. Would mid or high take care of maintenance upgrades to, or would that be more low or mid range? Which category really bumps our school, our high school up?
Sure.
Long term.
I love your question so much, and I'm going to answer it pretty vaguely, though. I know. So there is a lot of analysis that still needs to go into determining what those appropriate levels are. This is really just meant to be an illustrative scale. We're not at the point where I could come to you and say, this building, whether it be the middle school or the high school, is in need of X amount of renovations, and it is at Y dollars as a result. So there's a lot of that conversation still has to happen, but what you're talking about is very instrumental to this analysis, and it's part of the process that we're going to go through, is that comparison between your opportunity cost of just renovating or investing at a higher level for a longer, lifespan of a facility, and what's the trade-off there. So we're going to do that. We don't have all that data to present to the community tonight, but yeah. Oh, please.
So the one thing I would want to add to the conversation is we are, I haven't counted the months, but 16, 17 months at the least away. If you were to go back to the timeline, I don't know what slide it was early in the presentation, there's a lot of time. The one thing that we're committed to is multiple opportunities for the community to ask questions just like that one at a time when we actually can give more specific answers. So we're going to be very communicative. We're going to present all kinds of opportunities for the community to weigh in and give us voice and ask questions like that when we can give good answers. Yeah.
And next time or the time after, I'll have some fun pictures too. Stuff that gets me all jazzed up. Yeah.
You're reading ahead in the test section, the next section.
Cost of borrowing?
Cost of money.
Yeah.
Coming up. We'll explain that in more detail in just a few minutes.
Yep.
Square footage, to be clear, the square cost per square footage.
It's construction only. Yes.
There's more to the story.
Yep.
Okay.
So Andy, if you want to give that one to Mr. Nelson, I'll start us off with the first several slides. So right now, those are great questions. We want to hear because we want to be able to address that as a board level and ultimately go out to the community. Real quick, who was here in the state in 1994? Anybody? So proposal A passed, great. What does that mean? It means a lot of money goes up to the state of Michigan, and then you have your fall count and spring count. Like, that is the most simplest way to help describe how schools are funded. There are some additional federal grants, state grants, local revenue taxes, all this other fun stuff, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to the number of kids you have in the building. So again, you saw in the updated 23-24, 24-25, you have your updated FTE, which I just find amazing that you and Ms. Wooden and the rest of your team, like, have no idea what next year's foundation amount, what's enrollment going to be. So you have all these different variables, and yet you come with balanced budgets. So again, congratulations. One of the things you probably saw in your budget is you don't have a huge capital expense or capital improvement program. So for instance, we do work with Delta Dental. They're a nonprofit, but they're a large corporation. They have 8.5% of their revenue is for capital improvement. To put that in perspective, you said, hey, let's say I need a new roof. Ms. Wooden, can I take a $4 million out of our capital improvement within the general fund? You're probably not. So at the end of the day, districts across the board, across the state, really tried to preserve general fund for programs, teachers, educating kids, if you will. At the end of the day, if you've never, as a community member, you can actually go on every district website, all 553 in the state. There's a transparency reporting, and then it kicks out, obviously your budgets, et cetera. So we know you do have a sinking fund, and we'll talk a little bit about that here at the end of the day, but right now most districts levy that 18 mills. I think you're at 17.9745-ish. Again, rounding, if you will. That's the operating millage, if you will. Going forward, the sinking fund, that is a pay-as-you-go. And so we know you have a opportunity to renew that in the future. So again, the state legislature changed it. So back in 2017, you used to be able to go for 5 mills over 20 years. Now it's 3 mills for 10 years. But now you can also include technology, infrastructure, as well as technology equipment, but only for the students, not the teachers, which I still find a little interesting. You can also include buses. So at the end of the day, again, we're not looking for any action, but people are like, so how are schools handling their capital needs, if you will? So again, about $850,000 per year is what you generate based on that pay-as-you-go. As I mentioned, if you have to replace 200,000 square feet of roofing, Mr. Crow, what's a roof going for now? 25, 30 bucks a foot, $6 million. You'd have to wait about 7 or 8 years to collect that to do one roofing project. So guess what the district's done? In 2004, you had a bond for $11.4 million. You invested in the middle, or into the high school athletics. And then again, most recent bond, 2017, 69.7, really focused on elementaries, additions, really, take care of the academic spaces going forward. So those are really the 3 major components of how districts are funded for capital projects. With that, I'm going to turn over to Mr. Jesse Nelson, who is a partner at Baker Tilly. We've collaborated on over $2 billion of financial what-ifs. So again, I appreciate the opportunity. So, Mr. Nelson, here's your...
Oh, great. Thank you, Paul. You always save the most exciting for last. That's why you have the accountants coming forward, so thrill a minute. So anyway, I always like to have good graphics. That helps me go the right way. So how do we finance this? What is a voted bond? How does that play out? And one of the big things that really drives what our funding is, what our property tax millage rate, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, is our taxable value here in the school district. So what we have is the 20-year history of the Mason Schools taxable value area. We're going all the way back to the change in 2005, and you look in the top right corner, you can see we've been growing at 5%, and we actually hit a 6.29% number this past year. These numbers came out recently in May. This is very common for Michigan. I think we're all aware housing values have been going up, property values are going forward. And then the nice thing, if you're looking at a bond capital plan, the higher property value you have, the more money you can generate. So that does help keep an overall lower millage rate depending on what you're trying to do with the project. So this trend has been very helpful to the school district, certainly over the past couple of years, and certainly with most school districts across the state. All right.
Going back to that, the top.
Sure.
The six and the 5, how much is that contributing to inflation?
So the rule is you're about to go to 5% or inflation the lower of, and so when you get at 6.29%, you're seeing property value turnover. So what happens is my home I've lived in since 2011 only goes up by that amount, But as soon as the house sells, it goes right to the value at the sale point. So when you're getting above that, that means houses are turning over and they're coming on the rolls at that higher property value amount.
And Jesse, how does like new housing stock? So let's say you build a subdivision with 100 houses, and obviously they're taxed at whatever that property is sold at. So back to your point, if the property sale, let's say, was 200,000 in 2011, all of a sudden now it's 300. That's just that much more in taxable value based on the same quantity. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's, you know, just very interesting. This is a $500 million taxable value in '04. It's almost close to $1 billion now in 2024. So this is a chart looking at our estimated existing bond millage rate just on repaying the bonds that we have outstanding. So your green bars at the bottom are our annual bond payment that we're going to be making, and then it's the black line is the estimated bond millage rate. How the bond millage rate works is the community passed bonds prior that we saw going forward. We issued those bonds, we did the improvements that the community approved, and then the deal is you, the school district, must levy a property tax every year to bring in the money to solely make the bond payment. So this bond millage rate doesn't interact with the general fund. Anything that operates with the school district, from an operating standpoint, it simply brings in the money to make the bond payment. And then you can see towards the middle, about 2026, that line begins to drop off. The reason that that line is dropping off is you can see that the annual bond payment is going to decline, so we don't need to levy as high a property tax rate because the payment we need to make on an annual basis isn't as high. So that's why you see that bond millage rate begin to decline. This is a nice setup for school districts that do want to do more improvements. Because you don't necessarily have to change the millage rate, or it doesn't have to go up as much, because with those bond payments dropping off, that's creating some capacity to bond for or finance other improvements if it's needed without having to increase the millage rate as much or be able to keep it the same. So there's a nice kind of setup coming up with the 2026 tax bill on the chart. So slide 4, or 44, depending on what number you want to choose, is looking at what is a voted bond for a school district in Michigan. So community member walks up, what's going on. So on the left-hand side, really you're going to the community and you're asking two main questions. Community, you're asking them, what is the maximum par amount of bonds that the school district's allowed to issue? Is it 20 million? Is it 40? Is it 50? You're setting that bar or the ceiling of the amount of bonds that you can approve. You're asking the community, are we allowed to issue up to $50 million? This is a not to exceed figure. The other question you're asking is there's a paragraph under that number which shows refurbishments, athletics, and bus purchases, technology. You're asking the community, can we issue up to, again, $50 million, and can we buy buses? Can we buy technology? Can we do athletic improvements? You don't want to leave a word out, gosh, we have money left over and we want to buy a bus. Well, we didn't put bus purchases in our language. The community member did not approve that allowable use in the ballot language, so we cannot spend the money for it. So you're really asking the community, what's that not to exceed dollar amount, and are we allowed to use the money for those improvements? Then on the right-hand side, just as we talked about a little bit earlier, once the community approves that bond proposal, you sell the bonds, you then must levy a bond millage property tax rate to then make the bond payment every year, and that can change based upon the property values and your annual bond payment. So it's a little bit odd. Certainly, what you're going to communicate to the community is what the estimated change in that bond millage rate is, because that's the key to the property owners. But truly, they're not approving that millage rate. They're approving those two questions, and then if they do, you must levy the bond property tax millage rate, and then you provide those estimates as to what that is. In the middle, a strategy is you do not have to issue all of the bonds immediately in a proposal. So if you pass $30 million, you don't have to go out and sell $30 million. You can do 10, 10, 10 over 3 years. You can do 5, 6, whatever kind of combination you want. You just can't go higher than what the community approved. And there's some strategies with that. You've got your construction professionals. Does it make sense to go and bond for $40 million when you couldn't build $40 million worth of construction if you wanted to? So can you manage your interest expense? Can you manage your property values? This is a very common strategies that school districts are using, trying to, match the dollars coming in with the construction going forward to try to reduce the overall interest expense and how much debt is outstanding at a time. So that's a nice strategy that's available. Allowable uses of bond proceeds, they must be capital by nature. You can't use bond proceeds to pay teacher salaries. Again, anything with the operating of the school district. There's always a debate whether, that's a capital improvement or maintenance. Hey, we're going to paint the wall. Well, we can't do that with bond money. Oh, we're going to refurbish the wall. Oh, now we can. There's some legal language of putting that together. So all this slide is just giving you over what are we asking the community. If they approve it, we'll levy a bond millage rate, and what can we use the money for, and then what options do we have as far as capital planning and the finance side of these projects. So again, like we talked about tonight, we're not coming to any decisions. You've seen a lot of information. Same here with the finances, just what are some different scenarios? We put something on the chalkboard. What does that look like? So we ran 3 different scenarios up at the top. If we increase the property tax millage rate to 7.5 from our present 5.68 or a 1.82 mil increase, what would that generate? In the middle column is a 1.32 millage rate increase, and the far right hand side is if we keep the millage rate the same, but we extend out the period of time that'll be outstanding, what could that generate? And then we have what the difference would be for a 100,000 market value home estimate for taxable value on a year and monthly basis. So then in the blue box, what that does is summarizes what the capital funding is, and this is using that bond series approach. So I'm just going to use this example, but it's the same setup going forward. In each example, we would issue $10 million in 2026 in Series 1. In 2028, we would issue $37.4 million in Series 2 and 28. And then you can see there's varying degrees of amounts in 2030, which then at the bottom calculates what the total amount of bonds that you would be asking the community to for that proposal. Now, as far as financial strategies and planning, you can see that most of the money is coming in, I'll call it on the later years of the back end. That is more financially advantageous in that you have more time to pay off the existing bonds and these bonds before more bonds come on. And so you get a larger project amount, you can do a lower millage rate. So financially, the more you can stretch out your capital plan, put that together, that's going to result in a lower millage rate. And so financially, it's advantageous because you're managing that. Now, from a construction standpoint, or from a community standpoint, well, that can be troubling depending on what your projects you're trying to do. You're telling the community, hey, we're going to do this type of project, you're going to benefit from it, but it's not going to be financed until 2030, which means it probably won't be constructed until 2031, and it becomes a difficult process of what projects go first. Do we have to manage that going forward? Does Series 1 need to be higher? So you can imagine as you go through your capital plans, which then feeds the finance plan of how do you find their balancing act of obviously wanting to keep the property tax millage rate as low as possible, but also get those improvements that the community wants in a proper timing.
So Jesse, if you're just, let's say, replacing flooring, ceiling, roofs, windows, doors, probably as steady as you go, but let's say you want to design and build a new elementary school, obviously, it takes a while to design a facility. That's why you'd probably see like a shorter or smaller amount in the first series than a maybe second or third if you have like a larger one-time capital.
Yeah, exactly. We take the cue from the construction team, how that puts together. I always like to stretch it out because I want to get the lowest property tax millage rate. That usually raises my popularity, but at the same time, to Paul's point, if we're going to build a new middle school, you've got to have that money. You can't just wait and then counting on that money coming forward. So I agree with Paul. It's a very delicate balance of, how do we get those improvements with the timing, but how do we manage our financial plan to do that as well? And then that's where you have your stakeholder meetings, you have to run through the projects, and then you find that balance of what works for your community. All right. Let's see.
This chart, the market value. Do you know what the current market value of an average home is?
No, we could go back to one of your slides, right?
So it was like 36%, 100 and 125,000, so a third of your population.
Of taxable value.
Well, there's market value, and then your taxable value usually starts at about half, and then depending how long in your home, like we talked about going further, that begins to range. So this is saying, if you had 100,000 market value, we assume your 50,000 taxable value and what that would mean. Because your market value is higher than what you're being taxed on, to your point.
It's higher than 50.
Yeah, so you can take it times 2. You know, I just use that, so, okay, here's my mass, I'll take it times 2, times 3, just to make it simple so they can do that.
I think some of the communications, you know, again, should the board decide in 2025, like, I know Baker Tilly's actually done, like, what does it mean for the taxpayer? So on the district's website for transparency, you can actually look at your tax bill, type in the housing value SCV, and it'll actually tell you what would that be on a monthly and yearly type basis. So again, that's just that communication and transparency piece of, you know, that's just having a broad swath of, like, hey, everything's, you know, X, but.
Yeah, no, and to your point, I agree. I just try to pick I'm about 200,000, so I take that times 2, or I'm whatever, I take it times 3. So that's why we just use that number. I'm not inferring that that's, you know, a typical homeowner, so. All right. Let's see. So then the question is how does that change the millage rate on the long term? So we've got a line chart here. Your blue line at the bottom, again, that's where we are on our estimate now. So if we never did another bond issue, we just need to repay our existing bonds, what's our millage rate? The purple line is if we kept the millage rate the same. So instead of having that drop off that was planning earlier, we would just extend the length of the 5.68 and have it play out. You know, there's always confusion as, you know, how school district can you bond and get more money and keep their millage rate the same? Well, the reason being is that the 5.68 will be extended out a little bit longer than what it would be without that. And then we have the green line, which is the 7 mills, and then the gold line up at the top is the 7.5 mills, and then what the difference is and the changes of what that would be for the millage rate long term. And then as you begin working through processes, different financial options will provide the previous slide of what that looks like, and then you'll get updates as to what this looks like as well.
So one of the questions we heard is how often do districts go out for a bond? So again, some go out every 5 to 7 years depending on their capital needs. Some are every 7 to 10 years. We had one district 25 years, but guess what? It had to be a millage increase just to address the most critical of critical needs. So I think the district has done a good job. 2004, 2016, potentially 25. So that 10 to 12 year cycle. And Jesse, if you just want to kind of talk about these three, so regardless if it maintains the same or an increase, you still have an opportunity in that 10 plus year to actually look at a secondary capital. As crazy as it sounds, like, yeah, all the improvements you did in 2004, they're probably getting towards the end of their useful life. And so again, it's just that cycle of how do you manage capital needs, either through a sinking fund or a bond, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all can agree we want to maintain that facilities and try to find that balancing act of what that means, because we talked the general fund can't cover these types of major improvements. We talked about some of the funding mechanisms. There's a strong desire, and it makes logical sense, is how do we maintain facilities and then try to manage that property tax millage rate for our community as possible. So, you know, there's a lot of term capital planning. You've done a lot of strategic planning with the facilities. It's a nice situation. I've got a lot of clients that are looking at increases. It's nice that you have the purple line, if that makes sense for your community, where you wouldn't have to change it, you would just extend it. It's nice to have that option on the board.
The millage max, did that go up recently? That was 7%, or was that just for qualified bonding?
For just statewide, what are the rules, or?
Yeah.
So there is a state program known as the Michigan School Bond Qualification and Loan Program, and then to make it more confusing, there's a sub-program called the School Loan Revolving Fund. To participate in that program, you've got to have a minimum millage rate of 7.
Okay, so that's, but if you go over 7, you don't have to apply.
Correct.
Right.
And,
Well,
yeah.
so that would include other strategies such as the revolving loan fund.
Right, if you want to explore that and do some funding, yeah, you're right. There's that 7 mils would open that door if that was an option. Yeah.
And then obviously, there's other options of not being a qualified bond.
Correct. You don't have to use that program. One of the nice things about it is that you get the state's rating. They're essentially a co-signer on your bond, so it lowers your cost of borrowing. The downside is, you know, you work with your construction team, there's some more construction rules from what I understand, and then also the timing that you have to make your decision gets shortened because you do have to file an application with the state. So there's different pros and cons, and we can talk about that as a process. Okay, the pros and cons of using or not using that program, and then you can make your decision of what makes sense. Exactly, not a whole lot. You know, I usually, when I put those charts together, the construction team, what's that gonna change to our construction cost? What's that gonna change to our timing? Usually that's the main driver of where you go from there.
I think that's when Mr. Donnelly and Mr. Crowe and Ms. McClever talk about like the capital assessment pieces, there'll be pictures associated with costs, et cetera. And you may say, you know what, our sinking fund can take care of a parking lot, or it can take care of a roof. We know you're limited to about $850 a year-ish. You know, we have like, let's go for 3 mills. It's like, great, that's like 2.4 million. So again, you have a roof of 4 million. You got to wait 2 years to, you know, do some large capital, which again, how does that impact technology and equipment, et cetera. So again, we're not looking for any decisions tonight. This was simply, we're trying to wrap our arms around. We know you have a capital need. I believe the last 2 bonds you went through were qualified through Department of Treasury.
Yep.
You're on the state's website, so that's why I figured it. Yeah. So you went through the PQ process. It was a while ago, you know, pre-COVID, so I get that. But at the end of the day, I think to Jesse's point, it doesn't drastically change it, but there are some different parameters that we could talk about in subsequent. But tonight was more just straight up information of enrollment, steady, great. Utilization, high utilization. You're not looking at having to close or, you know, build replacement elementaries, things of that nature. And then obviously the financial aspect of it is really just giving you information. So I think you have 1 or 2 more.
So what we also want to do tonight is how do some of the other school districts in the area, where do they compare as far as what we call capital millage rates? You know, obviously the bond millage rate is repaying the debt, which funds the capital improvements. Then you have a sinking fund going forward. So what we have is the bottom is this is based upon 2023, as we're still finalizing the 24 rates. Your green bar, your bond millage rates, and then your gold bars if someone has a sinking fund, and then the 2 added together are the black line, just to let know what area school districts, how they're approaching the same things you are. Where are they in that area?
Just by curiosity, do you know what Leslie's sinking fund produces on a yearly basis?
I'd have to go look at the taxable value.
So you say, oh my gosh, it's, you know, almost 3 million, but it might only generate 250. Like, so again, that's how some districts, that's their only opportunity with a low taxable value to do some major capital improvements. But
yeah, to Paul's point, I think that's, you know, you look at this, but it doesn't tell the whole story. I mean, to have a larger tax base is an advantage. Your sinking fund at 1 mil will generate more than who has a lower property tax base. So, you know, while we look at this, and I think it's good information as far as what that means for the funding, to Paul's point, it doesn't exactly say what that really means. You know, if we show what that's generating, it would look like a completely different chart depending on their taxable value.
We didn't really talk too much about a sinking fund the last time, but at this point in time, you know, a 2, maybe 3 mil increase would have gotten us, we'd accumulate be $10 million without finance costs over the course of 7 years.
The initial 2 mil would be $1.6 million,
yeah, per year.
Yeah, over 7 years, if we would have done that at the same time. But I'm just saying, it is significant.
So it would give us less money and charge the taxpayers more.
No, I think his point is that if we had raised to 3 mil and then not spent the extra in the sinking fund, just put it in the bank, we have $10 million.
However that's used, I'm not suggesting what would have happened. Would we borrow less? I don't know. But I'm just saying, for purposes of looking forward, it might be a financial strategy that we should.
Are you familiar with any districts that raise sinking fund money and then just bank it?
So we've had a couple, Clarenceville in particular, they were at 4.35 mils. They were actually hit it before the change. They generated $400,000 a year on that, so they had 2.4 million. They banked it for 2 years. They did a cafeteria expansion, but they did no other improvements, and now they have a $40 million capital need. They're like, so what do we do? So I appreciate that, because that's one of the analysis we can actually run. Oh no, yeah. Yeah, and I think when you look at your capital need of 617,000, you know, so let's call it, again, let's say it's 150,000, kind of broad over 60, I mean, you're talking $80 million. You may say, hey, you know what, 7 or 8 million could be out of this sinking fund, so parking lots, windows, doors, I mean, that kind of gets rolled into the overall. But I think at the end of the day, your capital needs are going to far exceed any potential general fund or sinking fund. But we have seen a lot of districts combine. So, hey, we're planning a bond, but let's say we don't go out for the full capital need, but we're going to offset it with a sinking fund over a 5 or 10 year period. So again, that's something that we can bring back to the board. I think that's a great strategy when you talk about facility assessments of here's option A, B, C, D, and E, and then Rob can say, okay, here's what your total capital needs are, and oh, by the way, here's how you can finance it through A or B or A and B or C. And then obviously Jesse's done a phenomenal job, like how fast can Andy draw and how fast can Rob build? And so, again, tonight was some great feedback and conversation on the things that we want to consider in our next presentation of, you know, how do you keep that millage rate at where you're at? Okay, what does it mean for a potential increase? And I think what Rob showed you is it does give you an opportunity 10 years from now to look at a secondary, whatever that may be, versus handcuffing, let's say, for a 30-year going forward. But again, we will incorporate a sinking fund, working with Ms. Wooden, and like what does a renewal look like in that time period? What could it generate at the same millage rate and increase, et cetera, and kind of work backwards from that. So that's a great point.
Do we have what is, do we spend $850 out of the sinking fund every year? Do we have a balance at this point? Or what we spend? I mean, we're on the low end here, clearly, relative to other districts nearby, but you do get a lot of bang for your buck.
Mm-hmm.
Despite its limited, obviously you don't get it all at once.
Let's see.
That's it. So we'll bring up Mr. Donnelly as our moderator, and then we'll open up to any additional comments, thoughts, and then maybe Dr. Kinzer will close the conversation. So, Kevin?
All right, questions and answers. Anyone got any remaining questions?
Yeah, so a question for GMB Crispin folks, specifically to, say, our performing arts facility. Is that substantially different than need per square foot, or how that goes? Because that's a very different type of project, right?
Yes.
And that's an area that is in sore need of complete.
Yeah, that's a really great question, intuitive to getting into a specifics of a certain type of improvement. Yeah, a fine arts facility, that's going to be higher. Athletic facilities, that's going to be higher. So the values you saw are for kind of more typical, nominal educational spaces. But through this analysis, we'll look at those spaces. We'll get that input of like, well, yeah, is it fine arts that needs enhancement or not? And then what are those dollar values? And then, so that, as I was saying, it becomes better fidelity as we move along to tell you what it would take to do that. But great. Yep.
We just planned a new auditorium or fine arts center, new out of the ground as an addition. And that, in today's dollars, is about $575 a square foot.
How many seats?
That's about 600 square feet, or 600 seats.
We look at it's like they always look at it's like 35 to 40,000 per seat. So like, hey, I need 1,000 seats. Well,
Yeah.
we're looking at 34 million. Real quick. I mean, so it's.
So that guides back to your question. If we're looking at classroom and we're going to renovate a wing, you know, you could be in that 150 to 200 without, and do some really nice things, right? If we're talking about a new fine arts center, then the rest of the desired scope just has to be less, right? Yeah, great question.
Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
So next steps for us, we certainly will we meet a couple times a month. We'll continue doing that throughout the summer. We'll be considering a lot of the input that was generated tonight. When we come back to school in the fall, we're going to be focused on information. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our community is aware of the great work that happened through the 2017 bond. One of the phenomenons of the pandemic is parents and community members are not in buildings anywhere near as much as they used to be. And our elementary buildings
are really quite impressive. So we want to make sure that the community is well aware of that. The $69.7 million that were invested in 2017 have been very well utilized. Then we also want to give the community an opportunity to provide us with much more formalized input. So we'll be generating a survey, which we'll put out to the community in the fall, probably October or November, which will give the community an opportunity to really weigh in. So they'll consider the information we share. I guess I left out an important part. Not just the elementaries, but also the secondary, which we've not spent much energy on beyond security and HVAC. We want the community to see both. And I think there'll be a pretty clear contrast between the two. And then we want to ask for input. We'll certainly be doing additional presentations such as this for the board and the community. And then hopefully things will begin to take shape, and we'll go from there. So thank you. Appreciate everyone's attention. And I look forward to the next opportunity we have to share with you. All right, so we have the opportunity this evening to introduce our next high school principal. So we began the process of searching for our next high school principal in January. We posted the position, received many applicants, and many highly qualified applicants. Worked through a very comprehensive process to narrow that initial pool of candidates down to a select few. We did some screening interviews, followed by in-person panel interviews with 2 separate panels, and then some very small conversations at the end. Significant reference checking. In fact, Mrs. Lilly was pretty impressed with the lengths that I went to. People she hadn't talked to in a long time. So at the end, we had one candidate emerge as our very clear top candidate. So Mariah Lilly is currently, for just a little while longer, the principal of Fowlerville Junior High School, where she's been for the past 12 years. Prior to that, she was assistant principal at Fowlerville High School for 4 years and a science teacher in Belding for 9 years. And we are very fortunate that she will be our next Mason High School principal. Welcome, Mrs. Lilly. So I want to be very clear here that I did not really give Mariah a heads up that I was going to give her the microphone, but there's no real expectation other than just a few words. You can just introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. You had everything memorized, Gary. I'm impressed. This is pretty impressive. First of all, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. It has been great. I have had a wonderful welcome to Mason Schools. My home has been Fowlerville for the last 16 years, which is also a great school district, but I live in DeWitt currently, and so I'll be traveling to Mason, but the welcome here, the central office staff has been phenomenal. I've been able to tour the entire district, every single building actually. Randy and I probably, 11,000 steps or something in 4.5 hours. And so what Dr. Kinzer's saying about the elementary buildings, they're phenomenal. I've been through them, they're beautiful. And so I'm just really excited about the opportunity and for giving me a chance. And I'm excited about meeting all the people here in Mason. It's already been a great welcome, so thank you.
Okay, we're kind of wrapping up the public part of meeting tonight. We do have a second opportunity for those that did not use the first one for public comments. I didn't see any more forms filled out, but if there's anyone else that wants to speak tonight, come forward now. Then at this point, we change to a closed session and welcome you all to the door. And watch on the way out. It's a bit of a maze. And we're going to go into closed session to evaluate our superintendent tonight. So it'll be 60, 90, 120 minutes. You're welcome to come back if you want.
What's that? Anybody want another mic? So
Yes. Thanks all for the update. Rita, hello.
So the live stream is going to end because there will be